Curmid fáilte rih Jim Cahill Buanú Gnó héanaige Accounts Plus taithí na bliantaige a gobar san árnáil innealtóireacht agus díon túsaíochta agus is dói os bunus cúntasár mai héanas cúntasár é Jim gur go dtigan daoine cé go dtigan tú do gnó so cé as bhfuil an teideal de tíocht cécha déit muid bheith níos tuiscinaí agus céad le haine agus na toraí anmuid ar an gnó a hiiscint níos fearr. So Jim, I appreciate you giving your time today and we look forward to seeing your presentation. You're probably still on mute, Jim, if you're...
It's just after reminding me, yeah. So I think, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, yeah.
Okay. Now, I can't start my video because the host has stopped it, so... Can you see my video? Okay, start my video, that's perfect. Okay, so thanks everyone for attending and good morning to everyone. The theme of today is, I suppose, regenerating your business. And in the first presentation, we talked about looking at doing things differently because of COVID. So that's kind of, I'm going to talk a little bit about how finance can help that. Now, what's going wrong here? For some reason. Okay, that's it. It's slower changing the slides, I think. Sinead has just mentioned a bit about me there. Unusually, I started off as an engineer and then I went to accountancy. I worked in the multinationals for about 8 years. I came back to Galway about 20 years ago. I was doing a lot of business advisory, lean, system selection and implementation. But over time, my business, I suppose, has changed towards more part-time financial controller and then financial type projects. There's still there's a bit of improvement involved in everything. But mostly what I'm doing now is part-time finance. And I'm on a number of panels, the panel Cúrsaí, the mentor panel for Údarás, a number of EI panels and a BIM panel. So in the first presentation earlier on today, we were talking about change in the business. And one of the things business leaders need to be able to do is predict the consequences of their decisions. And it's funny, a friend of mine was a bank manager and he used to always say to me, whether we like it or not, we evaluate businesses by their accounts. So business leaders probably need to be able to identify what's going to happen to their accounts as a result of their decisions. And the role of finance then would be to support the business leader by being able to model the outputs from the inputs provided. So, and that's, I suppose, the starting point for what I'm about today. Anytime you're going to make any change, you need to sit back and ask yourself a few questions. Is this going to be profitable? How much money will I need to implement this change? Usually they need money up front. And then can it repay the investment or can it repay borrowing if I borrow, and when will it be able to repay those? So if I was working with a company and they were going through a change, one of the first things I would do is start to do some sort of projections. Now, it can be a full-blown set of projections, or you could even just do a subset. You could do a little part of the business. You generally better do the full-blown, but sometimes you don't always have time, or you might even have to do what I would call a quick and dirty, even just to see, is it in the region, is it in the vicinity? So when I'm doing projections, over time I've kind of, I feel like, standardized the way I do them. And I have what I now call my planning framework, ARCS, so that I can remember it easy. But the first thing I will do with any business is try and understand what activities are going to happen during the planning period. Now, most people will think of sales, and sales are an activity and they have to be considered. But you might be trying to develop a new product. So you might have an R&D thing going on or a product development thing going on. You might be trying to develop new markets. You might be opening an office, Paris, London, New York, Dublin, wherever, you know, a new office for you. You might be trying to bring in a lean project, for example, or do something completely different. You might be implementing a piece of ERP software in the thing. There's loads of different things that count as activities. So my first stop is, what are we going to be doing? Next stop, then I move on and say, well, what resources will they consume? Will those activities consume? And years ago, we used to talk about the 5 M's. I don't hear people mentioning it now, but I use it because it's easy to remember. When I'm looking at resources, we talk about materials. That could be raw materials. Methods, ways of doing things. Machinery. And I include, we'd say, space in under machinery. So office space, factory space, all that sort of stuff. Manpower, labor, the labor that's going to be involved. And then money, what money? Now, I'm looking at money later on, but the 5 M's kind of trigger me to think about those 5 things. Materials, methods, machinery, manpower, and money. Once I identify what resources we're going to consume, we'd say, I then sit back and I start to look at the costs. So I put costs on those resources. You know what labor is going to cost you. You know what rent is going to cost you. In any of the resources, you can sit down and put a cost against them. And then when we get to that stage, I need to schedule those out because I'm interested in cash flow. So if I'm making a sale, when will I collect that money? If I'm making a purchase of raw materials, when will I have to pay? Labor, I generally pay either this week or next week if we have a week in hand. So I sit down with all the costs that I'm incurring and I figure out when I'm going to be spending that money. And from that analysis, I can put together the business, the balance sheet, the profit and loss, and the cash flows. And now, sometimes I go into companies and when they're doing projections, they only give me maybe a profit and loss. I don't like just having the profit and loss on its own because you can make a mistake. But if you do the 3 of them, the cash flow, the balance sheet, and the profit and loss, you're much more likely to pick up any errors that you might be making. So, so that's why I would do those 3. The other thing about the projections is sometimes people just give me a cash flow or a P&L balance sheet just for the total years. But you could have a year when there's something happening maybe in the middle of the year and you're really short for cash. And if you just focus at the year end, you're going to miss that. And you may run out of cash in the middle of the year. So I would always prefer to see a monthly set of projections. So that's kind of a starting position. We're making a change. So what are the consequences of that change? Next thing then, and this it's an old phrase, you may be well familiar with it. It may be corny for you by now, but I like it because, I discovered over the years, running a business using your accounts is like driving a car using the rearview mirror. By the time the results show up in your accounts, you can't do much about it. It's gone, it's past. And I always remember working in manufacturing factories, sending accounts out maybe to head office and having questions about what happened last month, going down onto the factory floor. And those guys were pushing out orders for this month. They didn't care what happened to last month. I was only annoying them. And I'm always very conscious about that. So I always have liked that phrase. But I equally like the corollary. In fact, in some ways, I prefer this corollary. Your accounts should confirm what you already know about the business. And I think if you've done a good set of projections, you'll have identified the inputs, the outputs, the relationships, how everything hangs together. And you'll be walking around your own business and you'll see something and you'll be able to make a fairly good estimate about how that'll impact on your accounts at the end of the month. And I always remember the first job I had when I worked in industry. I was coming back from the canteen with a colleague and we were at month end and he said to me, I think we're going to make some figure. Let's say it was 200,000 this month. And I was looking at him just in the door, and said to him, how do you get that? And he says, well, we know what we're going to sell because we've all our sales orders on the books. So we know our revenue figure. We know generally what our gross margin is because we know what our cost of sales is. So we know what it costs us to make the product. So I know what my gross profit is. We know how much headcount we have. We know how much rent and other overheads we pay. So I can make a good stab at the overheads. I know there's a few unusual things going on because we have projects. So he was able to, off the top of his head, just say, I think we're going to make about 200,000. And I remember he was right. And I always remember that afterwards. So your accounts should confirm what you already know about the business. And it's funny, one of the most common questions I get from when people approach me to work for them is, they have a set of accounts and it's different to what they expected. And nobody can explain to them why. And I don't like to see that. It's a weakness. So I'm going to go back now to something that I came across first in Lean, PDSA. Many of you will be familiar with it. Some of you will have called it PDCA. Anytime we were doing a new, taking a change initiative, an improvement project, we started off by planning it. Then we put it into practice. We executed the plan, the do stage. Then we looked at the results that came out of the plan, the study stage. And then we acted on our learnings. You know, we either changed our assumptions or we changed the way we were doing something. Our act could be just do it again. You don't have to make a change, but like you make a conscious decision as to what you're doing. I suppose that's the key part of the act. And when I was doing this for a while, I realized, hang on a second, that's what we're doing in finance. We make a budget at the start of the year, or we might have a 3-year set of plans, projections. Then we run the business, the do stage. Then what we should be doing is getting a set of management accounts, and we should be saying, what happened? What were the results? And then we should be saying, why is that different to what I expected? What did I get wrong? What happened that I had no control over? What should I be doing differently? And then we go back and we make changes. Maybe we go back and change the plan, make different assumptions. Maybe we think we're losing too much money here on a particular department. We need to have an improvement initiative in there. So I see PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act, I see finance as implementing that day in, day out. Good finance implements that day in, day out. Now, just in passing, some people say C for check. For me, C is a yes, no. It's a binary answer. I like study because I think it's richer. You may not get a yes, no answer, but you may learn an awful lot just from the study aspect of it. So as I've worked with companies over the years, I've been looking at how they use finance. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I wrote a blog post and I was saying to myself, I used to call it the 3 no's. The first group of businesses, I call them the no offenses. They have a set of accounts, or they have accounts, they have a bookkeeper, they have somebody coming in, they do the wages, they process all the sales invoices, the purchase invoices. But all they're doing is complying. They're not really getting information that they can use and run in the business. So I put them into the no offenses category. Then you move on and there's a second group, and I call them the no surprises. They'll have a budget. They'll probably have they will have understood their projections. So they'll be they'll be able to predict what their accounts are going to be. So they use their accounts to check how well they knew their business, and they don't get surprises. Then you move on to a third category. I would call them the no regrets. Usually they're people that have a very good idea. They have a business with huge potential, and they don't want to wind up in 5, 7, 10 years time saying, why didn't I give it a bit more effort? I used to use Jack Charlton's phrase, I should have given it more of a lash. But why didn't they put more effort in? So they tend to do long range plans, more strategic thinking. The accounts tend to be very heavily involved. Finance tends to be very heavily involved in the overall planning. And I call them the no regrets. Now, a couple of years ago when I was working with Enterprise Ireland, they talk about the finance pillar, and they analyze their companies into 4 categories. The first one is companies with basic financial management capability. And I see that as tying back with my no offenses. They basically have the basic bookkeeping records and that, but they're not really using them to help management. The second category they call integrated financial management. It's similar to my no surprises. They talk about budgets and reviewing the accounts every month and understanding the accounts, and accounts finance being very involved in decisions. Their third category is strategic financial management capability, and that's what I have been calling no regrets. So they would have the long range plans. They're looking at everything strategically. Anything they do in finance is supporting that strategic direction that they're taking. They have a fourth category for companies that would be fundraising that they call access to finance. And these are companies that know they're going to be looking for funding, and they keep everything to hand. They're always ready. They'll be able to do a set of cash flow projections. They'll be able to run all the reports they need very quickly if they have to go to a VC or to a bank or to somebody for funding. So it's just interesting. And I suppose the key question I would ask there is, where do you see yourself as being? Are you a no offenses type company, a no surprises or a no regrets? And what then would you think you should be doing to move from one stage to the next? And the key important thing to remember is, if you're in level 3, you're already doing 2 and 1. If you're in level 2, you're already doing 1. So 3 is doing all the compliance stuff.
And Jim, about another 3 or 4 minutes.
Sure, yeah, I'm nearly
Okay.
there.
Okay.
So the key thing is to get to those stages, you need to have done projections. You need to understand how your business works. And I like people to have identified KPIs, key performance indicators. And these are kind of leading indicators that when they look at them, they will help figure out what their accounts are going to look like. And to do that, you need to learn how the business works. And I'm back again to this slide. I'm going to finish up more or less with this slide. Because if you think about how anybody learns, how does a child learn? The child tries to do something, it might fail, it might try it, it'll keep trying, or else it'll try something different, and eventually it learns. And that's kind of how we are as well. So I think we should be using our accounts as part of Plan, Do, Study, Act. That will help us identify KPIs, that will help us be able to predict the results, and that will help us make better projections. And when we are making change, we'll have a much better idea how everything is going to turn out. So if I leave you with one message, it's going to be, take PDSA and think about your accounts as a facilitator of PDSA or a key part of PDSA. And that's me done. So thank you very much. There's just my contact details there. Thank you very much.
Jim, it's great. I suppose as one who sees a lot of business plans, I always feel sales revenue, well, I suppose you're talking about new businesses probably more than experienced businesses, because you have accounts to look back at and you can work out of them. But I suppose new businesses always overestimate sales, underestimate costs, and the time, to get to market or do R&D. I suppose when you're looking at that, setting off from a blank sheet, what would your words of advice be there, Jim?
Well, I think anybody starting a business is implicitly making a projection, because they wouldn't do it if they didn't think it would make money. But they're not reducing that projection to a set of plans. So I do think, like, I've gone into businesses and done quick and dirty projections in a couple of hours. I've gone into one business, and I remember this, I did a set of projections in about 4 hours for a retail business with 2 or 3 stores. And about 8 months afterwards, the owner of the business came up to me and he says, I learned more about my business in that first 4 hours. And it surprised me at the start, but then I realized I was asking him questions he hadn't asked himself.
Yep.
And that was the key thing. So I would say, don't think you're not doing projections. If you're setting up a business, if you're a startup and you're going to invest money in something, you're implicitly making decisions based on a projection, and you would be better off to go through the process, even if you only do a 2 to 4 hour estimate of it, but you need to do that little bit of work, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. I see now there's a chat here, so I'll just check what it is. So it's Cott is thanking for the great, the very good presentation. So look at Gurmila Mahagat, Jim, ta James Ime agus go Claire, Visha Shin Harvest Simul, ta Sulam Gwanship Tadavas, Tomoid Tasha Shaw Hafat agus Bemod Achor Sos agus Ascapis. So agus Mata Keshni Agi Nahoship Gerachor Shaw Apual Blautlan na cóirí seo is féidir linn béimiid a scapan na chur láthar agus bena iver teagháil sin agus is féidir lib teagháil díreach a dhéana lob. Tá muid Tharbh bhuaich gan na cainteoirí agus tá mar gom bhuaich go fuidan a chuidúlam seo a chud a bhaim agus sin cléan na nóirín Baba agus an ran commerce